Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Another Point of View. I've got an excellent guest today. Her name is Petra Velzeboer. She's got some great things to talk about, really interesting points of view on mental health and a really incredible story. I'm really excited to have you here and really to talk about your history as well as what you believe in. You know, I think it's so interesting and I was really excited that you were willing to come on here and talk about it. So start with who you are. I don't want to do it for you. I want you to tell the story to me and to us.
Sure. So as you said, my name is Petra. Well done on saying my surname correctly. I'm a mental health consultant. So that's really the space that I've grown into and my career is all about. I'm a therapist and a coach, and I've got a training company that does mental health training for leaders and employees within organizations. But really the undercurrent of it all is like, how do we have empathy and nurture human connections, like even in the workplace? Whereas old school, it was very much, you know, this is my work mask, this is my home mask.
Absolutely.
Like, how do we bridge the gap so people look after themselves and that we save lives, like essentially?
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think it's a very old school model a lot of businesses are still in, you know, and in a way, you know, I think our older generation was actually trying to protect us with that, you know, because our older generation comes from World War II. Where they actually say, right, we can't mess up again, you know, so we're going to work hard for it and make sure we all stay disciplined. But we're coming so far from that now. We're actually realizing that workplaces need a lot more different things than just that
Well,
work
the
ethic.
whole workplaces are changing, right? So the
Absolutely.
way we can work with technology and remote workers, and you know, we're able to almost reinvent it a little bit.
Hmm.
But there is still we're always turned on. We're always driving forward, competitiveness, productivity, and these
Hmm.
are some of the things that can drive people to stress, burnout, or if they've got
Yeah,
a mental health issue, they don't want to talk about it for fear of being seen as weak or as not being capable of moving things forward in the same
absolutely.
way as their counterparts.
And that's ironic, isn't it? Because I think actually to be able to talk about things is actually a huge strength. I think it's almost weaker not to talk about it because you're actually worried about what people are going to think of you. You know, it's great strength when you can be vulnerable. To be vulnerable, I think, is the greatest strength we can all have because it allows us to live a completely different life as well. You know, far more free in your own body and mind, and in environments you work in. But tell me about how you got to this stage. So there must have been events that happened in your life that you realized you wanted to talk about mental health.
Absolutely. The journey is always personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a very, let's say, alternative upbringing. I was born into a religious cult called the Children of God,
Hmm.
which people have all sorts of connotations of what that might be like. But think of like hippie communes, coupled with, free love, but then sort of like Mormon teachings, if you want to think about it that way. So
Okay.
so lots of ideologies about how we should live. So basically my generation was being groomed and raised to save the world from the sort of end of the world, and we had this responsibility based on biblical teachings and all of that.
Yep.
So that starts you off with like a little bit of pressure about who you should be in the world and how you should show up.
Yep.
But also there were wonderful things. So it was a bit of a bubble growing up. I grew up in India and Brazil and Kenya and Russia and sort of all over the world, which I can now appreciate has given me a head start really in working
Yeah.
in London with so many different types of people. We're trying to understand backgrounds and that sort of thing. But it was kind of after I left and I became pregnant and I moved to London and I sort of cut off all of my support networks. That thing about talking, we'll get to that, is just crucial, right?
Yep.
Because what we do and what I did was isolate myself. So because I felt so much shame about, you know, not adjusting to motherhood in sort of the right way. I didn't have a formal education growing up, which meant I didn't have any confidence about having done what I thought every other normal person did. I've now realized, like through entrepreneurship and all of that people can go many different routes. But I felt like an odd one out. I felt like the tricky thing was I was really trying to be normal. Like I thought if I could just crack this code of normality and say the right thing and do the right thing, then everything would be okay. What I didn't know was that my vulnerability, my authentic self was hiding deeper and deeper within myself. and to the point that I couldn't sustain it anymore.
Mm.
So about 10, 11 years ago, I had sort of 2 young children. I had started studying. I had started doing some of that to just build some confidence. But I'd also turned to alcohol addiction as a way of numbing out and coping with, you know, the sense of betrayal, the sadness. I would definitely say I had some depression going on. And I hit what I refer to as a rock bottom point where I didn't want to live anymore. And I remember as clear as yesterday, like waking up and staring at the ceiling from my bed, and just this immense feeling first thing in the morning that I wanted the day to completely end before it had even begun. Mm. There were times when I wanted to run away, where I drove in blackout, you know, just really dark stuff. Yeah. But I woke up and I thought, okay, I'm going to give myself a 1-year deadline, which might sound a bit bizarre, but it was like my internal way of figuring out what was a way forward. So I gave myself this internal deadline that during this 1 year, I was going to try to observe and learn from people who had somehow cracked it. Because I thought, I see people walking around who seem to be happy and like, oh, we've got a mortgage and a car, and these things make us happy. And I thought, let me just delve into what are the habits, what are the things that they do in order to look after themselves. And I guess that set me on a path to learning how to look after myself. I joined a recovery group and sort of stopped drinking just to clear my own head around that depressant cycle. I studied, and I looked back after the year, and things were by no means perfect, but I certainly felt hope that I wanted to live again. And that kind of set me on the path to working with young people, working in mental health charities, and now sort of morphing into working with businesses and using therapy. But I think the main things that I learned was, if you're visible and if you say your truth, whether it's to a therapist or a friend or to someone, like that is the most profound step in moving your life forward. That was a whole mouthful.
No, I think that's great. I think you raised a lot of good points there. The last one there, very important. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to a therapist, a friend, your family. The point is that you talk. But not only does that get it off your chest, it actually helps you educate yourself based on their opinions too. And this is my big thing. This is why I think everyone should talk with everyone. Because when we still have those isolated chats, we're only getting one opinion back. And sometimes that can be dangerous, because we're only getting that one opinion, and that person might not be the right person to get the opinion of, but we just felt safe giving them that time. And that's why it's important to open up to tons of people from all kinds of walks of life, even if they don't agree with you. Because I've found that I've kind of, for my model and my mind, I've just taken bits from every single person I've spoken to, and I've got me. This is mine. And sometimes I speak to people and they thank me for what I have to say, and the model seems to work for them. But I certainly know that no one's model really worked for me. I had to kind of build my own mindset. And I did the same. You know, I had the event that happened in my life. And I think you either go one way or the other. You either stay in that spiral where you just go round and round. You know, I've sadly had another childhood friend commit suicide only 2 months ago. Either you stay in that spiral and you can go that way, or you say, no, fuck this, I'm not going to do this anymore. And you use it every day. You just get this compulsion to, it motivates you so much. And like you set a year, you said, right, in a year from now, I'm going to make sure that I've kind of at least learned how to be normal, whatever that is. But you at least set yourself a target. And that's kind of what I did. I did a similar thing. I went to Amsterdam, and I ended up loving it. And I stayed there for a couple of years, but really I was lost. And I was running away. I just come out of hospital. About 6 months previous, I just come out of hospital, the Priory in Chelmsford. I was 7 stone in weight. My BMI was 14, and that was all anxiety and depression led. And I came out of there, a kind of near-death experience, and I just said, right, I'm just going to go and find something else. I need information. There's got to be more to life.
Right. And I haven't got the answers.
And it wasn't actually the city of Amsterdam that I loved. It was the people. You know, Amsterdam has 180 nationalities. 1 million people come through Schiphol Airport each year. And I just spoke to anyone and everyone. I spoke to homeless people on the street. I spoke to
Yeah.
addicts. I spoke to businessmen and just hostile, travelers. And from each person, I gained little things. And I started to look at every single person as a therapist. I've had therapists since I was 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, I had very obsessive thoughts in my head. I had a lot of stress as a kid with my mother's ex-husband and other events in my life. And I was just this stressed kid. I grew up in a pub environment. So there's always drunk people around. It was just stressful as a kid. I just had these crazy thoughts. So from age 8, I had a therapist, and I honestly don't know how many I've had over the years. I often say both of my therapists are now in therapy, probably.
What, because of you?
Yeah, because of me, yeah. But I think I got to like 15, 16, and I realized that the therapists weren't helping me. Some of them helped me, but it was not because they were therapists. It's just because we kind of aligned.
Yeah.
And what I gained from that is, if I'm going to help myself with other people, I just need to find people that I align with. So that's what I did. And it might be only one person out of 20 that you truly connect with. But when you do connect with that person, it's like you've known them your whole life, because really they live the same life as you. And what you gain from each other is profound. You don't learn it in a self-help book. You don't learn it anywhere else. It's a real organic conversation, which is why I believe in talking to so many different people on this show. It's a real organic conversation where you both gain wisdom that serves you the rest of your life, and that's what I want to share now. So yeah, that was quite a mouthful as well. I appreciate it.
But I feel like the fear is around the stigma, right? That shit is real.
It's the stigma, and when I try to explain to people why this is important, they have a fear. It's just a fear they have. I was the same. I was terrified to speak.
Absolutely, me too.
But once I did, I was like, oh my God, that was really great. I learned so much then. And each time I found someone else along the journey who I really aligned with, it was like I leveled up. It's like each person kind of gave me some XP. And I just leveled up eventually,
And it's a process, right? So some at the beginning, it's like, oh, let me just say this tiny little thing and trial it out, like experiment with it. And over time, you can be more truthful and open, right?
Absolutely. I think I started with a basic story of who I was when I spoke to each person. And then each time I was like, no, I'm going to get deeper. I'm just going to, and eventually I never held anything back, really. If people didn't like me, they didn't like me. And I've always been very conscious. I've always had great manners. I was taught very good manners by my grandparents. So I've always known how to be polite, etc. So I've never been rude in my conversations, and I just made sure that I just got my point across well, but in a way that people knew and understood where I was coming from, and that I wasn't really looking for chit chat. I wanted to have good conversations every single time. And if someone started veering off, then I'd kind of just close the conversation, because I didn't feel like I was going to learn from it. And I'm always so eager to find the next person who does want that deep conversation, because that's where we learn.
Absolutely. And the surprising thing is that when you take the first step, this is what I learned, in being vulnerable and saying a bit of your story or going deep, not 100%, but a good 80% of people will respond by going deep as well, or at least as deep as they're capable of. At least it's not discussions about the weather, right? So you then have the possibility to realize that you are not alone. That whole thing when you're in depression, you feel like you are alone, or any mental illness, really. I'm the only one suffering. And so as soon as you begin connecting, and it could be through sort of online support groups, it could be through anything, right? Face-to-face, any sort of people. That's when change begins to happen, I think.
I think you're absolutely right there. Once you give just a seed, most people come back with something.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, they just copy you, really. They give exactly the same amount. And that's why I always open up, I think, just straight up, because then I know I'm going to get as much from that person too. And that makes them feel like, well, they're telling me this, I can tell them anything, and like, it does allow people to open up.
But at the beginning, it's not just like a altruistic, let's all connect as human beings. Like
Yeah.
for me, it was like a survival thing. If I
Mm.
don't open up, I'm going to keep this in my head and it's going to make me suffer
Okay.
and I
Yeah.
could die. Like
Yeah.
that's how stark it was at the beginning.
Mm.
It's like, I have
Absolutely.
to do this. I have to connect in order to look after myself, and I'm a parent, and be some kind of better human being. And
Mm.
over time, it like morphed into less of a survival thing and more of a, oh my God, I've learned so many things. Let me learn more. How can I then get to the next level and the next level?
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about that. When did you start Adversity to Advantage? How many years ago now?
So the podcast?
Yeah.
So the Adversity to Advantage podcast, which I run, it's only about 18 months
Okay.
old. So it's pretty fresh. And it was really out of my desire to learn, of course, because the conversations always teach me something, but ultimately to create platforms for people of all walks of life, like not just the stereotypically successful people, but the people from all walks of life, to talk about, well, what were the challenges that they faced? And not only the challenge and the happy ending, right? Because we love those stories, but like, what was the struggle in the middle? And what are the small things, like the habits and the routines that we now need to put in place in order to look after our mindset and like have a preventative approach to mental health, like looking after our mindset, right? Like as you would the gym, right? You go
absolutely.
Right. Rather than just from a crisis perspective. And it's been so exciting. Like, you know what it's like when you first start, you're like, nobody's going to listen to this. I don't even know who wants to be interviewed. Who am I to do this? Like imposter syndrome and all the rest of it.
I was overwhelmed with the amount of people who were willing to come on board.
Right. It's like people want to tell their stories and they want to share their learning. And it's amazing in the digital age just to have that much. If you want to look for the positive, like uplifting, like connection stuff, it is out there. But it's also scary to create that level of visibility for yourself when I know my journey and I can connect with smaller groups, but kind of going, there was so much shame about being raised in a cult and not having an education as a child. And for me to step into it and be like, public platform, this was my history, I was suicidal, and I continue to, as a flawed human being, grow and develop, that was a both scary and exciting place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say as a flawed human being, I think it depends how we look at it, doesn't it?
Not to be confused with broken. Like,
okay.
I don't believe people are broken that need to be fixed in the sense where, as a therapist, sometimes that's the approach. Like, let me just fix your issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just mean that, we fuck up and we learn from it. And that's the beauty of humanity.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I think we all have our own plasters on us, but those plasters are actually, they make us. It is the journey. And I think the word flawed, for years, I looked at myself as flawed, or I looked at myself as different. I think when you explained how you looked for the normal people, I felt so different. I looked around at my peers, my friends, colleagues. I always felt, what's wrong with me? Why am I so different? But then when I came out of psychiatric hospital and I started to speak about things, I slowly found out that about 80% of my friends were on antidepressants too. And I was like, holy shit, like I had no idea, but no one talks about it. So no one knew. And then when I said, oh yeah, I've been given this, they're like, oh yeah, I had that. And I'm like, what? Like why?
And these are like close friends.
These
like
are close friends. It showed, and honestly, the more I spoke about it, the more people got in contact with me. And then I found out that they were on antidepressants too. And this is the big thing, most people are medicated now, sadly, because there's not enough budget for people to go and talk to someone, which again is a problem, because we shouldn't have to go and we shouldn't wait to talk to people. We should just talk to people. But it was amazing, just how many people were on antidepressants, and
some of that's the culture of prescribing, and how it's easier in 10 minutes of a GP appointment to prescribe rather than to think about healthy lifestyle, like the ways to well-being and nutrition and physical exercise. Like I've learned more and more, as much as I'm a therapist and want to think our brains are everything and we just need to, I now understand the connection between body and mind, and that we can put things in our environment and around us to actually support our mental health as well. But I will
Yeah,
say that I do think the top one is talking and connection.
absolutely. I think this is
100%.
the best medicine because, I remember when they medicated me, they told me that I was like, and it's a very common phrase that I hear a lot of people say, is that it's like a diabetic patient needing their insulin. And I really despise that saying because it's not. It's truly not. What might be is the communication and the love that we all need to give each other. That might be the insulin. But to say that the medication is, no way, because we haven't tried the other things first. We've skipped the actual humanity and we've just gone straight for the pill to say, oh, it's okay. We'll numb you and you'll forget about it. And medication is something I do want to talk about because I spent 3 or 4 years on it, which is minuscule compared to some people who have spent decades on it. But it still had a big effect on my mood. When I went to Amsterdam, I'm not sure if I would have been able to get to Amsterdam without my medication. However, when I did get to Amsterdam, I didn't feel what I wanted to feel from it. I remember sitting on the side of the dam and of the river, and it was such a beautiful scene. And at the time, my aunt had died. I was in this. I was lost, but I was also finding opportunities and finding friends, and I felt nothing from it. I didn't respond to my aunt. I didn't respond to my opportunities. Not the beautiful scene, and that's when I realized these pills are messing with me. They are completely messing with me.
Making you slap.
I feel so less human now than I ever did before, even when I felt really indifferent. So then I made a decision that I was going to come off them, and I did very slowly. I did come off them, but I think some people need to understand that the medication, again, it's like a plaster, or it's not even that. It's a temporary plaster. You have to learn that it is not the answer. That you use it for a period of time to help you get the information while you're on it. And for me, I had a nervous breakdown. Okay, so they gave me diazepam to take me out of that, which was a phenomenal relief. I did become dependent on it, but for those years, it did allow me to at least have some time to learn the information. And that's what people aren't doing. They're getting the medication, but they aren't doing the other part. So they stay on the medication, they stay on it and stay on it.
Yeah.
People need to realize that once you're on the medication, use that freedom to then start learning about, start communicating with anyone and everyone. Use that new kind of view that they give. Because I remember I felt like a new person. My anxiety was gone. My anxiety truly just took my life away. I was so agoraphobic. I wouldn't let my father even come around the house. I was terrified of anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
So suddenly I could get on a plane and go to Amsterdam all by myself because of this medication. However, because I went and did that and learned along the way, that's why I found it easy to come off medication, and people get stuck on it. Did you ever go the antidepressant route?
I did. I was given antidepressants at one point. I remember my GP experience was I was desperate and went into sort of an old school male GP's office.
Yeah.
And he barely gave me any eye contact, just looked at his little chart to tick things off, asked me a series of maybe 10 questions, and then gave me Prozac. And then I didn't feel comfortable with that. So what I did do, and what people aren't often confident doing, is I called up the surgery and said, can I see someone else?
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to a really empathic female doctor. I'm not saying it's the gender thing, but it just happened to be what it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she gave me something much lighter and different. But at the time I was also drinking heavily, and nobody told me about nobody was like, hey, are you drinking? Because that's a depressant. And you couldn't technically be on the antidepressants and drink. So I just did the combination because I wasn't ready, and I took antidepressants, would drink, would get violently sick, was in this sort of cycle. But I think the essence of what you're saying is that there is no one truth. It's not like just do this one thing and then everything's okay. It's like do something that perhaps creates a little bit of mental space to then learn, educate, and experiment like you did with talking to different people. And I did in a similar way through through books and talking to people is like, well, let me try this on for size and see if it helps. Right? For a little bit, like an adjusted period of time. And if it doesn't, great. If it does, great. Like add it to your routines and practices. And that's what allows you, even if you're going to live with a mental health condition your sort of entire life, which of course some people do, it's going to allow you to manage it in a healthy,
absolutely,
right, sustainable way.
Well, that's it. And, you know, I felt so aligned with you really on your points of view on this about being, you know, no, I don't have the answer because I'm still going through my journey, you know, and I say that very publicly, you know, I still have issues now and then, but I have a tool set that helps me manage it. And I'm still going through that journey to kind of, I don't think I'll reach the end. I don't think people truly do. I think even the greatest minds behind mental health, I think they still have their problems. It would be foolish if to say that they didn't. And we have to acknowledge that. People look up to people because they think they have all the answers, but really they have to find their own answers. And this is the big thing for me, that this is why the communication is essential, you know, because if there was one answer, there would only ever be one self-help book, right? That would be our kind of mental health Bible. We would read the book and we would be better. We'd never have another issue again, but that's not the case. That's why there's thousands and thousands of books on the subject. And that's the big thing for me. It's like, just like you, it's all about the journey, just communicating, finding out each part of it, to realize different things that you can manage. You know, my anxiety for a while was the big thing for me. And then it was my depression. You know, my insecurities growing up. I used to be quite angry, but bit by bit, I learned from different people how to kind of manage those things. And I still have those traits in my life, but they don't overtake my life. And, you know, I've been in a lot of shoes, same as many. And I've got to this point, and that's why I truly believe that anyone else can, even if they do have a mental health condition. And I don't want people to get stuck in that, because it's a frame of mind as well. It's an attitude we have. If I tell myself that I'm sick, then I'm sick. And I understand people's hesitance with that, but it's true to me. The more I feel or think I'm depressed, the more I think I'm anxious, the more I am depressed and anxious. Same with other things. You know, I used to be a complete hypochondriac, and you know, I would stir myself into those things as well. If you believe you are something, you either will end up being that or you already are. And I think one of the biggest things I did was, even if I didn't believe that I was at that point yet, I would tell myself I was. So I would tell myself that I was okay. I would tell myself that I was confident, but I wouldn't just tell myself. I would truly try and believe it, even if I didn't, because it kind of got my mind in the mindset that I was. And one of my therapists, he was a NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming. And, you know, that was another thing that kind of opened my mind into the whole visualization of things, you know, using visualizations to help yourself, which was incredible for me. You know, there was a really simple concept of, you basically imagine the thing that's affecting you. You put it on a piece of paper in front of you, a visual, an imaginary piece of paper. And then you like fill the piece of paper with all white until the image completely distorts. And then you crush it up and you just throw it away. And you do that as many times as you need to. And I would sit there and do it. And every time I did it and crumpled the piece of paper, I would feel better. And I would feel better and better. And I would imagine it going out my window and exploding into a million pieces. But by doing that, I slowly started to forget what those things look like, because I actually distorted it so many times. And by doing that, you do rewire your mind. But if I'd have stayed constantly obsessed about it, which I have a very obsessive mind, if I'd have stayed very obsessed about those things, then they would have carried on to affect me. I would have carried on with my anxiety, but I had to make a decision to change, even if I didn't think it was going to help me. Just by doing it, just by trying, kind of faking it till I made it.
Fake it till you make it. Love that.
It worked. It truly worked, and I still do it. but I'm not only with my mental health, I do it with my business, and I do it with other parts of my life, which have honestly helped me in so many ways.
Well, and this is where the idea that we all have mental health just like we have physical health plays a
hmm,
part, and
yeah,
that these sorts of strategies can support anyone in looking after, because we all, life happens, right? We
mm,
all get disappointments or grief or trauma or things that
yeah,
happen.
absolutely,
How
yeah.
do we look after ourselves? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, and you have to look after your body too.
Yeah.
I mean, so your history with alcoholism, I'm
Yeah.
sure that played a huge
Huge.
part. I can imagine that when you drop the alcohol, your mental
Yeah.
health kind of rised a little bit anyway.
Well, it did, but because I was so used to numbing out pain,
Mm,
it's almost like your
of
skin,
course,
like
yeah.
you have no skin at the beginning because you've
Mm,
got to learn how to cope with pain. So it's almost like the noise goes bigger while
mm,
you have to learn to manage it in order for it
okay.
to kind of balance out. And interestingly, about a year ago, so I'm sober for about 10 years, and I also don't go to AA anymore
Mm,
because they are their one truth. And there's so many more arguments now for how health and meditation and all sorts of other things can support people who want to
mm,
live sort of a sober life. But I wanted to test the theory about a year ago, because back in sort of 10 years ago, life was really stressful and difficult and depressing. So I thought, hey, life's now perfect, and I've got all these things under my control, and it's great. I wonder if I'd actually be able to balance my drinking now,
right.
because I don't have anything well, I have life's challenges, but I don't need to
Mm,
viciously numb anything out. Interestingly, that experiment lasted for 2 weeks, and then
yeah.
it ended. But the main premise of that was, it wasn't I mean, it was the drinking, but it wasn't so much like the carnage from a night out, so to speak. But it was that for a full week after me having a drink, it was like the volume on negativity
Mm.
was just up in my brain. It
Oh
was just
wow.
like
Okay.
cranked.
Mm,
And so this is where, for me, alcoholism is very much a mental health condition. It
absolutely.
triggers off my depressing, negative, and by the end of 2 weeks, I was crying over my kitchen sink as
Yeah.
if it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And all the conditions in my life were in my control and perfect.
Hmm.
And so that was, I mean, I needed to do that experiment because it just told me that
Yeah.
um, like I had to make a choice between successful living and drinking,
Yeah.
just
Well,
because
I
that's
think you
how it
proved to
affects it.
yourself how strong you truly have become by doing that,
Right.
actually, because it would have been so easy for you to carry on,
Yeah.
but it takes a strength to not. And by doing that test for yourself, I mean, mine's a very mild version, but I quit smoking after 15 years,
That's
um,
good.
and it was really hard, yeah. But in the
Uh-oh,
end,
did you
it was
test it?
actually, well, I tested it with a vape. I thought I'll just have this vape. It's no problem. I'll just have it when I need it because I still get cravings for nicotine now and then. But of course, as soon as I picked it up for a week solid, I just could not let it go. I was putting more and more nicotine in it. And then I
Yeah.
was like, holy shit, what have I done? I've actually
Yeah,
just started smoking again.
pretty much.
And yeah, so I spent 3 days going through that again. And I was like, no, no more. And I put it away. But it's very easy to get back into that pattern that we're so used to. Humans are very habitual things, right?
Yeah.
So it's we need to make the positive habits because we're going to have habits anyway. Like that's what we do. I think it's just if we can introduce positive habits each day to overtake the negative ones, we start to feel better. We feel more
Absolutely.
fulfilled,
Yeah.
and we still have a drive. We still get motivated by these things. I mean, it's motivation really. It's dopamine, isn't it? And as long as we have something that fuels that dopamine drive and it's natural and it's not going to harm us or others, then it's great because we're going to have our dopamine chases anyway. It's just important to either put them into I think, business or family or, just something that really contributes to society and community as a whole. Um, but yeah, I'm always, impressed with your story. I think it's absolutely amazing. Um, Tell me what's next for you. Do you have any goals of where to take your podcast next, your business, or?
Yeah, so I'm actually only 6 months into fully running my own mental health consultancy. So I was a clinical director of a company before, so I've lost out, like I've traded in rather the structures of a company and that paycheck and all the
Mhm.
rest of it to fully jump in and live my own sort of authentic truth. And I have found it's been scary, it's been lonely, there's been new learning that I've had to do in order, what I feel, my perspective is that it's taking me to the next
Mm.
level again. So in those moments of sort of fuck, it's all on me, I've got to figure this out, I kind of go, okay, well, how am I being trained to be able to cope with the next level? So I'm
Mm.
very much building a training company. I've got some facilitators that go into businesses and talk about, train up the leaders essentially, around mental health at work. And
Excellent.
really, again, how do you have these conversations? It seems so simple to us because we've
Mm.
been experimenting with these conversations for decades, right? Or a decade. But in businesses, they're like, oh, so scared of like the impact or
Mm.
what might happen. So you've really got to kind of hold their hand in doing it. And as far as the podcast, I just keep going, hey, if people want to keep telling their
Yeah.
story, it just keeps growing.
Excellent.
And that's amazing and cool. And it's also learning, what are the routines and practices that I need to put in place now in order to sustain getting to the next level? Because sometimes the stuff that worked before doesn't quite work anymore, or you've got to do it in different doses.
Yep.
So it's worth like reviewing and reflecting, like, where are you at now? Where's your mental health at now? Do you need a bit more of this and a bit less of the other in order to keep evolving?
Absolutely. I give myself checkups. I now and then I do catch myself out, and I go, you're not doing very well lately. You need to kind of buck your ideas up again.
I wonder why. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. But it's part of life. And as long as you recognize, I think it's recognizing your old habits or your kind of triggers. I think once you do, then you can steer yourself back.
Absolutely.
And it's just, I think it's consciousness. I think as long as you must maintain that kind of, you must always pay attention to yourself. Because once I don't personally, and I start to focus on other things, then I become, I wouldn't say negative. I become a bit of a detriment to myself.
Yeah, the experience is just heavier, and it
Mm,
doesn't have to be that way. I definitely
absolutely.
turn to sugar. I turn to dating. It's all very like
Yeah.
fast paced, and I kind of go, okay, I need to. I just started going back to a kickboxing class because that's like a
Yeah.
really healthy way to get my
Excellent.
adrenaline out. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Well, that's it. I think we need things like that. And I try to meditate at least 3 or 4 times a week. But it's really just, I try to stay conscious, because if I don't, then it's not really that I'm a detriment to myself, but how can I put this? I focus on other things so much, like my work and other people, etc., which is a big thing for me, focusing on other people. But then I stop focusing on myself.
Forget about you.
And I
Yeah.
think people think it's selfish to focus on themselves all the time. But of course it's not, because if you're not okay, you can't affect anyone positively anyway. And I get very carried away with my work. I'm still, I wouldn't say an obsessive guy, but once I like something, I keep doing it. With my businesses, I'll get into an idea and I'll work on it till like 6 in the morning. I'm not even joking. I will just hammer it until I get the idea
Obsessive.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And I try and step back from that, because if I do too much of that, I start to affect myself badly. But I have spoken to a few people now who kind of do the same, and it's like my projects go really well, but the rest of my life just falls apart. Relationships and friendships. I focus so much on, I think, bettering myself all the time, or my business success, that I forget about my happiness. And
Which is, I was just going to say, it's really good to have nurture friendships that will
mm,
challenge you in a way and will help to notice when some of those things are happening, so you can put checks and balances in place a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. So, what about your routine? Do you have a routine that kind of keeps you in check? You say you do your kickboxing, but do you have like a daily thing you go through, or is it?
Sure. So on a good day, as we know, day, especially when you work for yourself,
Yeah,
I'm sometimes traveling
yeah.
and doing business, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's a perfect thing, but a good way in the morning to set myself up is I'll do about 15 minutes of yoga stretches. I might have something on YouTube that's kind of uplifting on in the background. And then the ones that I really like are 3 things I'm grateful for and 3 intentions. That's it. So it keeps it short and manageable, but allows me to kind of set the pace for my day. I'm good in the morning, and that's one thing that people need to try on for size. In the morning, I'm focused. I like to jump into work, so that feels really good. This has been working for me. But now that I'm leveling up and taking so many like massive opportunities on board, I then realized that it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So it was good, but it wasn't enough, which is why the kickboxing has come in, so I can just get that adrenaline going. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think that's important. Exercise is a huge thing for people too.
It's huge. The meditation thing, I do inconsistently. I love Insight Timer, the app, because it's got lots of variety. I do find it very difficult to sit still with my thoughts, and I used to be quite harsh on myself for that. But I've since realized that, exercise is a form of meditation, or I will have something on my headphones while I'm walking or moving, and that just suits me better. It's, and that's okay. It took me a while to be okay with that being okay, but it actually is,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm quite inconsistent with it. I just aim to do it so many times per week because I can't do it every day. Well, I just don't seem to. I guess it's my discipline, but it's also life. I don't think people should beat themselves up and say that they can't try. I think people try and do it every day, say that they can't, and then they stop it completely. But I don't think that should take you away from just staying conscious about, because consciousness and meditation are different, really. To stay conscious is really being mindful of everything you do. I mean, it's kind of like a constant meditation. Because I'm the same. If I sit there and I stay quiet for 15 minutes, it's very difficult. It's
so hard.
My brain just doesn't shut up. It just wants to keep yapping. And I find it much easier to instead take time to just concentrate on what I'm doing, things around me. And that way I don't have to shut my mind up, but I quiet my mind down, or at least put it on tasks which are perhaps mundane enough to just keep me relaxed and let me focus on breathing, etc., and help me stay aware. A common technique that people do is they look around to see what's around them, and they start naming different things around their surroundings.
Or connect to your senses, right? Like your body or your sense of taste or sight or whatever, just to ground you a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And by doing that, they pay attention to things around them more. But then you get another habit going. By doing that, you start another habit, and your new habit is paying attention to things around you. So I do that now and then. I look at the same things around my office, but I go, there's my MIDI keyboard over there. I'm going to tell you how many crazy things I've got in there. There's my whiteboard. There's a wardrobe. And I just go through the things, and I just look at the detail of them. I sit here with a cup of tea, and that's kind of my meditation. But by doing that, I stay aware of my surroundings, and I start to do it when I just go to the shops or something, and it just helps me stay aware of my surroundings. But I actually realized that I always did that kind of growing up as well. When I was a young kid, I was always really, I'd look at how objects were kind of just made and things, and it always kept me aware. I was always kind of, people always said I was mature for my age. I think I just became quite conscious quite young. I still had my issues, but then I think perhaps because I became aware quite young, I got my problems quite young, but then I was able to turn them into really good insights before everyone else did as well. I know people in their 30s and 40s who were going through problems that I had when I was like 17.
That's true.
Yeah, and I feel that I did it early, but it's going to definitely help my life and help me impact other people's lives going forward. It happens to people at any time in their life, but I think it does happen to nearly everyone. And when I say it does happen, I mean there's an event. There's always an event that happens to people, and it's important, even if you, I think, don't have any issues going on right now, that you do kind of start to learn how to deal with things anyway, because eventually something in your life is going to come along that you're not going to know how to handle. And the sooner people kind of learn a mindset or a tool set, even if it doesn't affect them right now, it will serve you eventually.
Yeah, which is the whole essence, I guess, of my podcast, which is around resilience and how do we build that? And do we need the idea of a rock bottom or a catalyst moment to push us or drive us there? Or are there, and I would say 80-90% like from people that I talk to, like they do, like there's been some kind of event that has pushed them or driven them in some way. But it's set in theory, we don't. Like in theory, we just maybe need to witness something in someone close to us or a friend in order to kind of go, ooh, what are the tools in order to allow myself to be ready in some way? But equally, I think there are the adversities and the challenges that hit us. They're the perfect practice ground. And then you get through that one, and then the next one comes and you're actually like, bring it on, I can do this, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's say you prove it to yourself each time, you know, and that's what it's about. Well, that's what the whole thing about CBT is, right? It's that you prove, and that did actually, it was quite helpful for me. That tends to be the typical thing that the NHS go through, CBT. It's
which
normally
the shame there is that it becomes a one size fits all. Whereas there's amazing techniques and can support some people, but then it just simply doesn't fit everything, which is why, that's the only thing.
And then I think it's overused, really.
Yeah.
But I think it can benefit people. It's really the concept of, if you do something and prove it to yourself that you can do it. That's the part I love. I think they make it too complicated, really. I think people just need to understand that you should start proving things to yourself.
Yes.
You know, you don't need to go to a therapist to learn that. You can start proving things to yourself today. I was at a point where proving something to myself was walking outside of my house. And one day I would do it, one day I didn't. But every time I took 2 steps forward, sometimes I take 1 step back, but I'd take another 2 steps forward. I might take another step back. I'd keep taking those 2 steps forward. And eventually I was at a place where I was getting on a plane by myself and going to Amsterdam, you know, and I feel like I'm in a different life now compared to how I was then. But it's by doing those 2 steps forward and proving it to myself each time. I never followed a CBT thing. I was taught the model, but all I really took from it was like, I'm just going to prove it to myself each time.
And the thing is doing it, not just thinking about it. That's that's the massive shift that can happen for people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good point, because I think people get so stuck in just thinking they can do things. And
or if I just understand enough in my mind about the patterns and the ideas and the theories, then I'll have cracked the code and fixed myself.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that works for all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just your mental health. It's all parts of your life, business and also, you know, even this podcast. You know, I didn't really know how to start a podcast. I thought I just want to engage with people and have conversations and try and learn a thing or two, or let other people learn a thing or two from it. So, it's not going to go right every time, but there's going to be good things that come from it. And it's going to unravel how it unravels. The main thing was that I just started. I just took the step and did it. And I'll learn along the way. You know, no one's going to really criticize me. There's going to be good things that come from each conversation. So just start. Whatever you want to do, just begin. Doesn't matter how good or bad you think you are or you are. If you just begin, you'll get there in the end.
It snowballs from there. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll wrap this up pretty soon. It's nearly been an hour we've been chatting.
Yeah.
I want to leave this note with, so if anyone's going through something right now, what would you recommend them to take the steps to do in the acknowledgement that the waiting list for the NHS are, 8 months?
Absolutely. I would say the first step might be to educate yourself a little bit. So if you're too afraid or the stigma is too great to be talking to people, obviously that's where the magic happens. I completely 100% think that talking to somebody and being vulnerable is where the magic happens. But if that feels like too much, get on YouTube, watch channels like Impact Theory, watch Brené Brown's TED Talk about vulnerability, watch the people that are living this already, so that you know that you are not alone. There's so much out there that can actually support your learning. And then from that point, tell somebody your story, tell somebody if you're struggling. Doesn't have to be a therapist. Obviously, if you can afford therapy privately, there's a counseling directory that you could look through. But really, it's about talking to somebody close to you and just being real and authentic and honest. And you'll be surprised what they come back with. The other thing I refer to are the 5 ways to well-being, which are connected to like a big research document, but they kind of highlight the 5 things. It's so simple. There's like a poster. I put it on my wall.
Okay.
And it connects to your physical health, giving back. I remember I was volunteering at a youth center when I was actually at my lowest point. And that allowed me for that hour or whatever to shift my perspective on the people out there, not just the dark bits of myself. Yeah. I think those are the first 3 things. And in all my conversations that I've had, people have said, go outside. So even if you're not going to the kickboxing class or doing the big gym thing or whatever, get outside, like get out of your little space where you're just stuck in your head and sort of try and experiment with being outside of that and just be open and curious to the magic that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Petra. Finally, please just tell us where we can learn more about you, because you've got some excellent content out there too. And I think not only YouTube, but people can learn a lot from your podcast too.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So everything can be found through my website. So it's petravelzeboer.com. I'm sure you'll add it into your notes. And the podcast can be found there, but of course it's called Adversity to Advantage. You can link to it through iTunes and Stitcher as well. That's where I keep people posted. So find me there and drop me a contact.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Petra. It's been an excellent conversation. I'm sure some people will learn some really great things from this.
Lovely.
And I'm sure we'll speak soon.
We will, of course. Thank you for having me. Take care.
All right. Excellent. Take care.